The party had thought the stone statues only came to life when someone got close, but now they were several steps nearer. Jin-Woo quickly figured out what was going on. It wasn't the statues that were moving. It was the platforms underneath them. The loud scraping sound that hurt their ears was probably from the platforms rubbing against the floor as they slid forward. Did they stop? Kim asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. While everyone else was focused on the statues, Jin-Woo looked down to check out the blue flames. The lights were flickering out one by one. 3 had already disappeared into darkness. Then, a loud creaking sound filled the air. "Cree!" someone shouted. "What? Where's that noise coming from?" Jin-Woo looked up to see what was happening. The creepy sound seemed to be coming from right in front of him. He noticed something weird. The statues in front of him were now closer than the others. Why were only the ones in front of him moving? Had they sneaked up because he stopped paying attention? Jin-Woo closed his eyes, trying to figure out what was going on. As soon as he did, the creepy noise came again. Creak, eek. It stopped when he opened his eyes. But things had gotten scarier. The weird figures were closer now. "What's going on?" someone shouted. Another voice trembled. "W. What do we have to do?" Jin-Woo yelled back. "Don't look away from the statues." He remembered that the sentries started moving when everyone turned to him. It seemed like those things moved in when no one was watching them, and then Jin-Woo saw another blue flame go out. Jin-Woo's group was still safe, and the stone statues hadn't moved, but he had a feeling something was off. He started counting in his head, keeping a close eye on the statues. Then it clicked every minute. One of the small fires went out. The blue flames were like a timer. To pass this test, Jin-Woo realized he just had to stay on the altar until all 36 flames disappeared. Things were looking up as long as they kept a close eye on the stone statues. It seemed like everyone was going to make it through this last round. Jin-Woo glanced down to check how many blue flames were left, so he could figure out how much longer they had to hold on. There were 30 flames remaining, which meant they just had to survive for 30 more minutes. But in that moment, Jin-Woo made a mistake that would change everything. Jin-Woo was busy counting the flames when he noticed the statues sneaking up to the altar behind him. Suddenly a loud creaking sound filled the air. Creak! The hunter standing with his back to Jin-Woo let out a terrified yell. "Anjing! Anja!" He sprinted towards the doors, clearly spooked by the annoying grinding noise coming from behind him. As he jumped off the altar, one of the red flames flickered out. "No!" Jin-Woo shouted in surprise, but despite looking like a total scaredy cat, the hunter managed to run through the open doors without anything bad happening to him. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in confusion. "Huh? What just happened, Sung?" "He got out," Jin-Woo asked, but he hadn't seen what went down because his back was to the doors. "Did anything change?" he wanted to know. "The doors closed a little," Sung replied. "Are they still closing?" Jin-Woo pressed for more info. "No, they closed a bit when that guy left the altar, and then they just stopped." Jin-Woo's mind flashed back to when one of the red flames had flickered out when the hunter stepped away from the altar. His heart sank as he thought about it. The answer finally clicked into place for Jin-Woo as he stood on the altar. He had been wondering how this was supposed to prove his faith, and now he knew. But here's the thing. This test was totally unfair for him. His injured leg made it hard for him to stand up straight, and he needed help just to stay upright. And then it hit him. The open doors in front of him weren't a way out, but a trap. Imagine a desperate moment where hope seems within reach, but it's just an illusion. If everyone on the altar had made a frantic dash for the open doors at the same time, the raging red flames would have been put out, and the doors would have slammed shut instantly. The result would have been complete chaos, a terrifying scene of blood and screams. But in a twisted way, the altar was also a place of promise, a supposed safe haven. Imagine a place where everyone is safe, as long as they do their part and stay in their own area. It's like a choice between something you can see and hope for, or something you can't see but have to trust will happen. There was a big test coming called Prove Thy Faith, which meant resisting temptation even when things seemed really scary. 2 important factors would affect the outcome. The first one was Jin-Woo himself. Something weird happened. People who normally would have rushed to get through the open doors stopped in their tracks to listen to what he had to say. Luckily, that meant they avoided getting stuck when the doors closed. We definitely got lucky. There's no other way to explain it. The reason people trusted him enough to stop and listen was because he had figured out the secrets of the first 2 commandments all by himself. But then something unexpected happened. A new problem popped up. Someone had walked away from the altar, And that changed everything. Now that hope was within reach, people's reactions were intense. The man who had been holding up Jin-Woo suddenly pushed him away and made a run for it. Song quickly grabbed Jin-Woo's back to steady him. As the man jumped down from the altar, another red flame died out, and the doors creaked shut even more. "Hey, stop!" Kim yelled at the second person making a break for it. But they escaped too. Jin-Woo quickly counted the remaining red flames and shouted, "Everyone freeze. We can't afford to lose anyone else." He looked all around front, back, left and right, to make sure everyone was safe. They needed a team of at least 4 people to keep an eye on all sides. Jin-Woo, Jo-hee, Song and Kim were the ones who stayed behind. If one person left, they would be blind to what was happening in that area. Kim wiped the sweat from his forehead again. "Song, what's going on? Fill us in," he asked. Jin-Woo explained. "We just have to hang out here until all the blue flames are gone." He shared everything he had learned so far. Kim listened carefully, nodding his head as Jin-Woo spoke. Jin-Woo wrapped up what he had to say, then added one last thing. "We can get out of here alive," he said. Each clue they found was a way to survive the room. So the last one should be no different. Jin-Woo was super sure that if they just stayed put and trusted each other, they could make it out without getting hurt anymore. But Kim didn't see it that way. "Hey Sung, what if you're right, but the door's still closed when time's up?" Kim asked, sounding unsure. Jin-Woo didn't respond. He had thought about all the possibilities, but he couldn't promise anything would work out. Kim needed to know for sure though. He wanted to make it out alive, and that was more important than maybe saving everyone. "I'm sorry, but I just can't do this," Kim said, shaking his head. "Mr. Kim," someone called out. But Kim just apologized again and climbed down from the altar. He took off running, ignoring Jin-Woo's calls as he sprinted toward the doors. When he reached the exit, he glanced back at the others one last time, but he didn't come back. Jin-Woo was furious. "Guar, damn it," he growled, clenching his teeth. It wasn't fair. He had just saved their lives, but instead of thanks he got betrayal. Without Kim to help, it was tough keeping an eye on the statues, just like he had figured. It was a lost cause from the beginning. 2 people were badly hurt, and another was so scared she couldn't think straight. They couldn't keep an eye on the whole area at once. The statues that were out of sight started to move, their stone bodies creaking and groaning. "Cree, cree." The sentinels were closing in. Song looked around and then told Jin-Woo and Ju-hee, "You two should get out of here." He sounded defeated. "Mr. Song," he was interrupted, but he kept going. "I'm the one who got you into this mess," just like Kim said. "If I have to stay, it should be me," Song said. His friend started to protest, but Song cut him off. "You've got a few more days left than I do, so you should get out of here." Song gave a small chuckle, trying to make his friend feel a little better about leaving him behind. Jin-Woo nodded, feeling helpless and awful about the situation. There wasn't time to argue about who should stay and who should go. Song was thinking about asking Ju-hee to help Jin-Woo walk, trying to make things a bit easier for him. "Jo-hee, can you help Sung?" "Yes, of course," she replied. But when Jo-hee tried to stand up, her legs gave out, and she fell to the ground. She cried out in pain. She struggled to get back up, but it was no use. Tears started streaming down her face. I don't think I can move my legs," she said, her voice shaking. Jin-Woo's and Song's faces turned serious. They could tell Jo-hee was really hurting. Her lips had turned a scary blue color, and her body was shaking in tiny spasms. This was happening because she had used too much magic when she was already super tired, both in her mind and body. Jin-Woo felt terrible. He knew she had done it to try and heal his hurt leg. He didn't know what to say. But they couldn't just stand there feeling sorry. The statues were getting closer and closer to the altar, their creepy creaking sound filling the air. "Creepy." Jin-Woo suddenly pulled his hand free from Song's grip and dropped to the floor. Song's eyes went wide with surprise. Jin-Woo's voice was firm and determined. "Mr. Song, please take Ju-hee and get out of here," he said. But Mr. Song refused to budge. "I told you, I'm staying." Jin-Woo struggled to stand up, but his legs felt like jelly. He knew he couldn't make it to the door on his own, let alone carry Ju-hee. Someone had to help her, and fast. Jin-Woo's mind was racing. They could just leave Ju-hee behind. But he couldn't bear the thought. She had saved his life so many times before, and now she was paying the price for trying to save him again. Jin-Woo couldn't bear the thought of leaving Jo-hee behind. He knew that if he survived and she didn't, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. "There's no time, please go," he urged, but Joo-hee just stood there, frozen. Song grabbed her arm and pulled her up. His face stern, tears poured down Joo-hee's face as she shook her head. "No, Jin-Woo can leave instead," she cried. "I'll stay." Jin-Woo quickly pulled out a small stone from his pocket, an E-rank essence stone, and pressed it into Joo-hee's hands. "Remember how I promised to take you out for dinner," he said. "You go ahead and get dinner without me. I'll catch up later. I'll collect my change from you if I make it out of here," he said with a smile, but the girl just frowned at him. "How can you joke around at a time like this?" she asked, clearly annoyed. He nodded to his friend Song, who then gave her a gentle tap on the back of the neck. Thwack! The girl's eyes fluttered closed, and she fell unconscious. Song scooped up her limp body and slung it over his shoulder. "Sorry about that," he said. "Don't worry, it was my idea anyway," he added, before bowing to Jin-Woo. Jin-Woo made one last goodbye gesture, then jumped off the altar. The old wooden floor creaked loudly. Creak. As he landed, he heard it again. Creak. Jin-Woo dropped to one knee and took a deep breath, letting out a relieved wheeze. He looked around. He spotted the sword that Kim had left behind. He reached out and grabbed it, feeling a surge of determination. If things were going to end badly, he was taking at least one of these statues down with him. Just then, he turned to see Song and Joo-hee, making a safe escape. What a relief. I'm glad I'm the only one who has to deal with this. He didn't think of it as some big heroic act. To him it was just the best decision he could make. If he hadn't made this choice, he would have lost his leg, and had to live with that for the rest of his life. That meant he couldn't be a hunter anymore, which was his job. He wasn't even sure if he could have a normal life without his leg. He had just graduated from high school, and didn't have any special talents, so getting by wouldn't be easy. His mom was in the hospital, and his sister needed tuition money. He thought it would be better for his family to collect the life insurance payout. If something happened to him, the association offered a huge amount of money, either 300 million won or 400 million won, to the families of hunters who died on their missions. This seemed like more than enough money for the life of a low-ranking hunter like him, who wasn't very valuable. Creak. Tud. The people he was waiting for had finally arrived. The first stone statue finally reached the altar and took its first step up. Jin-Woo gripped his sword tightly, ready for a fight. "Come at me," he dared the statue. But instead of attacking from the front, something sneaked up behind him. A long spear suddenly pierced through Jin-Woo's body, making him cry out in pain. "Jack!" He coughed up blood as agony shot through his entire body. Just hours before, Jung-hee had warned him to be more careful, saying that if an attack was just a little higher, it could puncture his heart. Now her words echoed in his mind. Jin-Woo let out a fierce scream. A monologue. The person who attacked him lifted the spear straight up into the air, holding it vertically. Jin-Woo was stuck in midair, screaming in agony as he was impaled on a sharp tip. He thrashed about trying to escape the pain, but it was no use. The statue tossed him to the ground like a rag doll. Crash! Jin-Woo landed with a thud, his bones shattering everywhere. "Ugh," he groaned, curling up into a ball as the pain washed over him. "Ugh. He was totally trapped. They had him surrounded on all sides. As he looked up at them, he felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't want to die like this," he stuttered. The reality of his situation hit him hard, and tears began to well up in his eyes. He thought about his family, and the people who cared about him, like Joo-hee and Song, who had been worried sick about him, until the very end. "I don't want to die," he whispered again. This wasn't how he wanted his life to end. Not at just 24 years old. Suddenly, a figure with a sword took a step closer to him. The man's face was as cold and hard as stone, showing no emotion whatsoever. Jin-Woo raised the weapon high in the air. His body was shaking violently, but he didn't back down. He stared straight at his enemy, refusing to look away. Then the sword came crashing down. "Sheej, Akhug." Jin-Woo thought to himself. If only I could get one more chance. He kept his eyes wide open, ready for whatever was about to happen. That's when it happened. Skreek. The sword suddenly froze in midair, like someone had pressed the pause button on a video. But that wasn't exactly what happened. It was moving super slowly, like it was almost standing still. The object was coming down at a rate of about 1 millimeter per minute. That's crazy slow. Even though it was slow, it was definitely still falling. Jin-Woo was totally confused. What's going on? He wondered. Just then, a loud ping sounded in his head, followed by a woman's voice he had never heard before. The voice said, "You have fulfilled all the requirements to complete Secret Quest. Courage of the Weak." Jin-Woo thought, Secret Quest? What does that even mean? Jin-Woo was totally lost. What's going on, and whose voice is this? It seemed to be coming out of nowhere. The voice just kept talking. Even though Jin-Woo had no clue what was happening. You have acquired the qualifications to be a player. Will you accept? Jin-Woo thought. Acquired. What does that even mean? It sounds like they're trying to give me something. And honestly, who says no to free stuff? Growing up in a poor family taught Jin-Woo to never turn down something he could get for free. But what's the point of free stuff when you're dead? Jin-Woo was torn. The voice in his head started talking again, and it sounded really urgent. Time's running out. It said, you've only got 2/100 of a second before your heart stops beating, if you don't make a decision. Jin-Woo's life was hanging by a thread. He wasn't sure if he was hearing things, but one thing was certain. He was on the verge of death. A sword was pointed right at his head, and to make matters worse, plenty of other weapons were now trained on him too. If all those weapons fired at once, Jin-Woo wondered if there would even be anything left of him. Jin-Woo had given up. At this point he didn't care what happened next. If something was going to be handed to him, he might as well take it. He didn't even need to say it out loud. Just thinking it was enough. A voice in his head responded right away. Congratulations on becoming a player. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light filled the air, and everything went black. Jin-Woo's eyes fluttered open. He found himself staring at a white ceiling, and the strong smell of disinfectant filled his nose. Jin-Woo Sung was lying on a hard mattress, and he knew exactly where he was. The hospital. Hospitals were nothing new to him. He had spent so much time in them that they felt as familiar as his local convenience store. In fact, people even whispered that he had his own special room at the hospital connected to the Hunters Association. As he sat up, Jin-Woo put his hand on his chest to check his heartbeat. It was beating normally. He thought to himself, I'm alive. But something didn't feel right. His body felt strangely light, like it was floating. Jin-Woo slowly opened his eyes to find himself in a hospital, but something was off. Usually waking up in a hospital meant he'd feel groggy and weak. Not this time though. He felt surprisingly refreshed, like he'd just had a great night's sleep at home. What was going on? He tried to remember what happened before he passed out. A sword was falling towards him. He remembered that part clearly. So, how did he end up feeling so okay now? It just didn't add up. I was totally surrounded by some really scary enemies. Even a top-notch team of fighters wouldn't have stood a chance against them. And yet somehow I made it out alive. It all felt like a crazy dream. But there was one way to know for sure if it was real or not. Jin-Woo pulled back the blanket that covered him. Jin-Woo's eyes snapped open. If what he just experienced was real, he would be missing a leg. But if it was all just a dream, are you awake? A deep voice asked from across the room. Jin-Woo jumped and spun around to face the speaker. Apologies if I scared you, the man said calmly. We couldn't wait any longer. You see, two men in black suits walked towards him, their footsteps quiet on the floor. They reached the bed where Jin was sitting up, looking confused. Who are you? He asked. But they were complete strangers to him. One of them, with a short military-style haircut, handed Jin-Woo a small business card. Jin-Woo took the card and his eyes widened as he read it. Jin-Woo, Korean Hunters Association surveillance team was printed on it. This team was special. It was the only one in the whole association made up entirely of super strong hunters. Their job was to keep an eye on all the other hunters, so it made sense that they would pick the best of the best to be on this team. But Jin-Woo was still confused. What did it all mean? Jin-Woo pulled up a chair and sat down next to Jin-Woo's bed. Another guy in a suit stood behind him, looking tough. These two big guys were really close to Jin-Woo, which was pretty intimidating. What brings you here? Jin-Chul asked. But before Jin-Woo could answer, he dropped some shocking news. You've been asleep for 3 days. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in surprise. Do you remember what happened before you passed out? Jin-Chul asked. Jin-Woo nodded, still trying to process everything. Please tell us everything you remember, Jin-Chul said. But Jin-Woo hesitated. Before I do, what about those two? He asked, nodding towards the other suit standing behind Jin-Chul. Are Mr. Song and Ju-hee? Okay? Jin-Woo asked, looking worried. Jin-Chul nodded to calm him down. Don't worry, they're safe. They were really hurt, but luckily they're alive and recovering. Jin-Woo let out a sigh of relief. Then Jin-Chul asked quietly, can you tell us what happened before? You know, before you passed out. Jin-Woo told them everything he could remember, except for some weird things he saw. That didn't make sense to him. So you lost consciousness, and then woke up here? Jin-Chul asked to make sure. Jin-Woo nodded. Yeah, that's right. I don't know what happened in between. Jin-Chul and the person with him exchanged a knowing look. Jin-Woo looked really worried that the only person who might have seen what happened didn't remember a thing, but the truth was, Jin-Woo was the one who wanted answers the most. Hey, can I ask something? He said. How did I end up here? Did a powerful guild get rid of them? Jin-Chul looked troubled, and took his time before responding. The thing is, he started to say, but then he paused, like he wasn't sure how to explain what had happened. The surveillance team didn't go alone to check out the situation. They brought some strong backup members from the powerful White Tiger Guild. This guild was one of the top 5 in Korea, so it was a big deal that they were called in. It meant the association knew things were serious. When they arrived at the room, everything was. Jin-Woo swallowed hard, wondering what had really gone down. The White Tiger Guild didn't get involved in just anything. So what could have happened to make them necessary? Everything, a voice asked. But the truth was shocking. Everything was really gone. The giant statue and the other stone sentries had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of them anywhere. Jin-Woo lay unconscious, alone in the empty space. When Jin-Woo came to, he stared at the person talking to him in total disbelief. Excuse me, he asked, his voice shaking with confusion. The other man nodded sympathetically. We were all pretty stunned too, he said. If all the survivors hadn't told the same story, and if we hadn't found the remains of the other hunters, we would thought it was some kind of crazy dream. Jin-Chul rubbed his chin thoughtfully, still trying to make sense of it all. Jin-Chul had been part of the surveillance team for 6 years. Ever since he became a top-notch A-rank hunter, he thought he'd seen it all, every kind of challenge and enemy imaginable. But this was something new. He'd even asked other countries' guilds and associations for help, but no one seemed to have any answers. Jin-Chul spoke up, choosing his words carefully. Here's what we think. Something big was definitely going on in that room, and whatever it was, it got stopped by someone, or maybe even a group of people. We figured that out because nothing bad managed to slip into our world before the gate slammed shut. Now, they have to think about every possible explanation. No matter how crazy or unlikely it seems, they need to consider all the different scenarios, even if they seem impossible. The association had thought about the situation over and over, and finally they came up with an idea. Jin-Chul waited to see how Jin-Woo would react before he continued.
I think that you've had a second awakening.
Hunter Jin-Woo sung, a second awakening. Jin-Woo's eyes went wide. It was super rare, but it could happen. Someone who was already a hunter could get a special second boost, called a second awakening. Imagine going through a transformation that makes you super strong. This is what happened to some hunters when they experienced something called a reawakening. After this process, most of them came out even more powerful than before. Normally, once a hunter's rank was decided, it was set in stone. There was no changing it. A hunter's abilities were determined from the moment they became a hunter. But reawakened hunters were a different story altogether.